that, second in those areas, okay? Why do you figure that, though? Can we? Well, here is a startling one. When you look at the cause of death among 15 to 24-year-olds, homicide is the leading cause of death among young black men and women in the target area. So maybe we need to reframe homicide as not being a law enforcement issue, but maybe it's a public health issue. And maybe we need to address violence as a public health matter, which means then that we get at the causes of the violence rather than simply responding to the violence. But all of these are questions that hopefully we'll be able to begin to consider here. One of the things that we did, and these are the last data that I'll dump on you, but we did a correlation of the 5th, 7th, and 9th graders in Long Beach Unified School District. And we went through something like about 90,000 records. And out of those, we found 6,000 that we could trace students from the 5th through the 9th grade, because that's where they received the tests. The 5th, 7th, and 9th grade, they received tests on wakeness. And using the Center for Disease Control scale, the Center for Disease Control says that in a healthy population, about 5% of the population ought to be obese. Well, in this one, you can see where we are. The red represents obese. The yellow represents overweightness. And one of the interesting things about the city of Long Beach is that it doesn't matter what ethnic group you're in. You exceed the levels set by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for what would happen in a normal population. At the same time, an interesting and really a positive note is look at the decrease in the obesity rates from the 5th grade to the 9th grade. So something is happening in the schools that we need to start very early, because one of the things that happens in correlating some of the scores is that as you look at the English language arts test scores, you see that the more obese you are, the lower the score on the California Standard test. So, and the more you are in the normal weight category, the higher is the likelihood of a passing score. Now, this is not to say that there are not obese students who perform excellently. This is to say that as a group, not enough are performing at a high level in order to bring the average of that group upwards. So that when we look at the English language proficiency or advanced proficient scores, we'd see the same statistics. Now, given that I've painted a kind of a bleak picture, there are some positive things happening. And interestingly, in civic engagement, despite the fact that all of these obstacles have been thrown up against black people, we have representatives in city government, we have representatives on the major commissions, we have important positions occupied by African Americans in city government, and appointed positions and civil service positions. So civic engagement ranks high. So here's the situation. Out of all of the obstacles, the white resistance, the Ku Klux Klan being able to march down the streets of Long Beach with impunity and recruit, and the city supports these kind of things in the early development. The fact that our ancestors could forge the kind of relationship that creates the fabric of the black community on which we now have means that something is still happening. And it's happening because of the persistence, the determination, and the willingness of Black people to forge relationships based on mutual aid and self-help, because city government has not been in support of improving the quality of Black life in Long Beach, according to the data. So, I'll leave you with a story. Flip Wilson was one of my favorite comedians. Not just because of Geraldine, but because of Reverend Leroy. He talked about the church of what's happening now, not the church of what's happening tomorrow, not the church of what's happening yesterday, but the church of what's happening now. And in one of Reverend Leroy's sermons, he was talking about getting the church of what's happening now up and running. And he said, brothers and sisters, we have got to get this church up and running. And from the amen corner in the right and the amen corner in the left, yes, Reverend, get the church up and running. He said, but before we can get this church up and running, this church is going to have to crawl. Make it crawl, Reverend, make it crawl. Yeah? He said, and after this church crawls around a bit, it's going to have to get up, and this church is going to have to walk. Make it walk, Reverend, amen, make it walk. He said, but in order for this church to really get up and running, we're going to have to dig deep down into our pockets and come up with the cash to make this church run. Make it walk, Rev, make it walk. So in order to move this agenda forward, we're going to have to dig deeply into our mental, intellectual, emotional, personal resources to move this agenda forward. So let's dig deeply today and going forward. Thank you for your attention.
Using arts and culture. Now we need to define what arts and culture is. What is art? Can anybody give us a functional definition of what is art?
The creation of a person.
You say expression?
A creation or expression of a person.
A creation of expression of a person. Okay, that's a functional definition.
Can we break down what type of arts? Like music, acting?
Arts are music, performing arts. What other kind of art forms do we have? Dancing. Okay.
Eating, those kinds of physical textile arts.
Yeah, painting, drawing, those type of things, and verbal expression. Okay. Culture is learned behavior that you learn from your environment. That's what culture is. When you establish a culture, you've learned something that's been passed down from generation to generation, depending upon your geographic and ethnic area. So what we're trying to do is utilizing art and culture to improve our community, giving our children opportunities to do that. So, giving our children opportunities to express themselves and to understand our history as a people. Now, the question is, how can we do that? And where does it start? What is learning art and culture in the African American community? Where does it supposed to start? In the home. Now, let's talk about the home. We have a different type of family structure than we did when we grew up. And we have to respect that, even though we may strongly disagree. So the family is different and fractured now. There are less males who's head of household than it was, drastically. Gangs are out there that are a form of a family. Then we have the spiritual institutions. How do we use those, first of all, in the family, how do we use arts and culture, utilizing the family, to change some things in our community for the positive? Yes. Speak up a little bit.
Make them more aware of the statistics of how things are currently now, so that way they can
make them aware of some of the statistical changes, historical changes that are going on in our community and what that means. Okay? making them aware. Anybody else?